There's a strange silence that settles over your life when you've done everything right and still nothing moves. You've prayed until your voice trembled, believed until your heart broke, and waited long enough to feel forgotten. You start wondering if maybe God has changed his mind about you. Maybe what you were hoping for wasn't meant to be. But what if this silence, this stillness is not God's absence at all? What if it's his preparation in disguise? You see, delay is one of heaven's most misunderstood languages. It doesn't mean no. It means not yet. It's the space where God hides his greatest work, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where character grows before calling can be carried. The promise hasn't vanished. It's maturing, like a seed buried in the soil, unseen but alive. Your delay is the sacred waiting room of destiny. What feels like denial is often divine design. Every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every long night of uncertainty, it's all part of a choreography only God could compose. He's aligning people, places, and timing that your impatience would have ruined if he'd said yes too soon. And when it finally happens, when the waiting breaks and heaven's timing collides with your obedience, you'll realize it was never a delay. It was protection. It was preparation. It was proof that the waiting was worth it. Because God never forgets what he promises. He just finishes building it before he hands it to you. There comes a moment in every believer's life when heaven seems to grow quiet. You look around and realize the prayers that once echoed with quick responses now fall into silence. The path that once felt clear now twists through fog and unanswered questions. You replay the promises in your head, the job, the breakthrough, the healing, the relationship, and each one feels suspended somewhere between earth and eternity. It's in these moments, when God seems silent, that your spirit wrestles hardest with the question, has God forgotten me? But what if this stillness is not the sign of his absence, but the proof of his preparation? Because when God delays, it's never out of neglect, it's out of divine precision. The waiting is not wasted. It's sacred ground where heaven is building what your hands cannot yet hold. Think of the farmer who plants a seed. For weeks, nothing appears above the soil. To the untrained eye, it looks like nothing is happening. But beneath the surface, life is exploding. Roots are digging deep, strengthening the foundation for what will one day rise. If the farmer were to dig up the seed too early, it would die before its appointed season. So he waits, not because he doubts the harvest, but because he trusts the process. In the same way, God buries your promises in time. He hides them not to withhold them, but to protect them from premature exposure. The delay is his way of making sure your destiny has roots strong enough to bear its weight. Because a blessing that comes too soon can break you faster than the one that never came at all. There was a woman once, let's call her Miriam, who prayed for years for a door to open. She had vision, talent, faith, but everything she touched seemed to fall apart. The business idea that looked certain failed within months. The friendships she built around her dreams dissolved under pressure. And after the 10th rejection letter, she stopped praying for success and started asking a new question. Lord, what are you trying to teach me in the silence? That night, as she sat in the dim light of her room, she felt something shift. Not outside her. Nothing miraculous happened that could be seen. But inside, peace began to whisper, louder than panic. It was as if God was saying, "You are not waiting for the opportunity. The opportunity is waiting for the version of you that can handle it." It took her months to understand those words. Waiting wasn't punishment. It was preparation. You see, the world applauds movement, hustle, achievement, constant progress. But God often calls His children into stillness, because movement can hide misalignment, and noise can drown out His whisper. When God delays, it's usually because He's trying to mature something inside you that success would have exposed too soon. Abraham waited years for Isaac. David waited 15 years to sit on the throne after being anointed. Joseph waited 13 years, betrayed, imprisoned, forgotten, before he saw the dream fulfilled. Every one of them had moments when it looked like God had said no. But behind the scenes, heaven was aligning every step with perfect timing. Sometimes, the longer the delay, the greater the destiny. Imagine Joseph in that prison cell. The man who once dreamed of palaces now sat surrounded by chains. He had done nothing wrong, and yet the door of his freedom stayed shut. But in that hidden place, God was teaching him something no throne could: how to trust when you cannot trace, how to lead when you have no audience, how to forgive before you have power. And then one day, in a single breath of divine timing, Pharaoh sent for him. The prison doors opened, and Joseph stepped into purpose so massive it made every year of waiting make sense. The same God who seemed silent had been orchestrating every detail for that exact moment. The truth is, God's delays are never random. They are deliberate acts of love. Because while you wait for what's next, God is shaping you into who you need to be when it arrives. So, if you find yourself in that in-between space right now, where you can't see what's coming, where it feels like heaven has paused your story, don't confuse delay with denial. Heaven's silence is often the sound of preparation. Sometimes God delays, not because you're behind, but because you're ahead of schedule. He knows the danger of giving you a crown before you've grown the character to carry it. He knows the weight of influence could crush an untested heart. So He waits until your faith can hold what your desire has been asking for. And here's what makes divine delay even more mysterious. While you're waiting on God, God is waiting on you. Not to be perfect, but to be positioned, to be so surrendered that you no longer worship the outcome, but trust the one who authors it. There is a holy tension in this season, the pull between what you feel ready for and what heaven knows you're not yet ready to sustain. But when the waiting feels unbearable, remember this: God is not just preparing the blessing for you, He's preparing you for the blessing. Miriam's story didn't end in silence. 2 years after that night, the door opened, not the one she had prayed for, but one she didn't even know existed. It came quietly, without the noise of recognition or applause. But it came wrapped in peace, aligned perfectly with her purpose. And she realized something powerful. Had God answered her prayer when she first asked, she would have ruined what He was building. Delay was not denial. It was divine protection. And maybe that's where you are right now, standing in the middle of what feels like unanswered prayer. Maybe God hasn't changed His promise. Maybe He's just making sure it lasts when it finally arrives. Because when God finally moves, He doesn't give you what you asked for. He gives you what you were made for. And that kind of miracle takes time. There is something sacred about the middle of a story, that silent stretch between the promise and its fulfillment. It's the place where faith either matures or collapses. In the beginning, hope burns bright. You pray with fire. You speak with confidence. You can almost see the miracle forming in the distance. But as the days stretch into weeks and weeks into months, the fire, you start asking the questions that once scared you. Did I hear God wrong? Why would He show me something only to take it away? Why does it feel like He's blessing everyone else but passing over me? It's in this quiet ache of the waiting season that God does His deepest work. He doesn't rush this process, because this is where He rebuilds the foundation of your heart, not for temporary blessing, but for eternal purpose. You think the delay is about the external, but He's refining the internal. The surface looks still, but heaven is rearranging everything beneath it. Think about the story of Lazarus. When Mary and Martha sent word that their brother was sick, Jesus didn't rush to heal him. He waited. He allowed time to do something unthinkable. Lazarus died. Every human instinct would call that a delay. Every emotion would label that as denial. But Jesus called it glory, because the miracle wasn't just going to be healing. It was going to be resurrection. And that's how God works in the lives of His children. He doesn't always come when you expect Him to. Sometimes He allows certain dreams to die, not because they're over, but because they need resurrection power attached to them. A healed dream inspires hope. A resurrected dream releases testimony. You may be in your own 4 days late season right now. You've buried what you thought was the answer. You've mourned over something that hasn't yet come back to life. But the tomb of your waiting is not the end. It's a womb. What looks like death is simply transformation. God allows certain endings so He can prove that He alone holds the power to begin again. The waiting season is not punishment, it's preservation. Imagine how much differently Mary and Martha saw Jesus after that miracle. Before Lazarus' death, they knew Him as a healer. After the resurrection, they knew Him as life itself. Sometimes your delay expands your revelation of who God is. He lets what you thought you understood fall apart, so you can meet Him in a dimension you've never known before. Delay matures your faith from believing for something to trusting in someone, and it's in that quiet middle, the stretch of silence where nothing seems to change, that heaven tests what you truly believe about God. You trust Him only when you see movement, or can you worship Him when you see nothing at all? Because worship in the waiting is the sound of surrender. It's what tells God, even if you never move how I want, I will still trust that you are moving. Every great testimony is born in that tension. There's a scene the world never saw. Jesus weeping at the tomb before calling Lazarus out. That moment of divine stillness, that pause before resurrection, carries the same mystery that surrounds your own waiting. Heaven weeps with you, not because it doubts the outcome, but because it understands the pain of your process. God doesn't rush your story because He values what it's shaping inside you. Some delays are designed to shift your dependency. When everything stops working the way it used to, God is inviting you to release control. You've leaned on your own understanding long enough. Now He's teaching you to walk by faith, not sight. And here's what's truly profound. While you wait, Heaven works in parallel. The delay is not just for your heart. It's also for divine alignment. You may be praying for a door to open, but God might still be preparing the room behind it. You're asking for a relationship to begin, but He's still healing the person you'll one day meet. You're begging for a breakthrough, but He's rearranging circumstances so that when the breakthrough arrives, it won't destroy you. He's not just building your blessing, He's building your capacity to hold it, the same way a blacksmith heats and hammers metal to make it unbreakable. God allows the fire of delay to shape you. You're not being punished, you're being tempered. Strength is born in the waiting, not the arrival. Let's return to Miriam, the woman from chapter 1. Months after her moment of surrender, she thought her life had settled into quiet obscurity. No open doors, no visible miracles. But what she didn't realize was that her consistency, showing up, remaining faithful in the unseen, was writing the kind of story heaven loves to elevate. One morning, she received an unexpected message. A small project she had quietly poured her heart into, something she thought no one noticed, had reached the hands of someone influential. Within weeks, an opportunity opened that she never saw coming. The delay that once felt cruel suddenly made perfect sense. The rejection letters, the waiting, the silence, they weren't barriers. They were divine redirections, and that's what the delay does. It repositions you without your permission. It teaches you that God's no is often a not yet, and His silence is not indifference, but strategy. He's aligning everything so that when the moment comes, it all fits with heavenly precision. If He had moved earlier, you would have thanked Him for the gift. But when He moves now, you'll worship Him for the wisdom. And when that moment arrives, when the silence breaks, when the waiting turns into fulfillment, you won't just receive the blessing, you'll recognize the pattern. You'll realize that God was faithful all along, even in the dark, even in the stillness, because the delay wasn't about holding you back, it was about pulling you deeper. God's greatest work often happens in silence, because faith doesn't grow in applause, it grows in obscurity. So don't despise your delay. It's the divine pause that prepares the soul for miracles that timing alone could never produce. When you can look back and say, if God had answered me sooner, I wouldn't have survived the blessing. That's when you'll understand the genius of His waiting. The truth is, when God delays, He's not punishing you, He's promoting you. But the promotion happens privately before it ever manifests publicly. And when He finally moves, the speed will make up for every second of stillness. Because when heaven's timing collides with your obedience, everything changes in an instant. But first, you must trust Him in the dark. There comes a sacred threshold in every delay, where waiting no longer feels like waiting. It starts to feel like surrender. You reach a point where you stop asking, when, God, and start whispering, however you will. It's not defeat, it's transformation. It's the moment when your timeline dissolves into His eternity. When your grip on control weakens enough for heaven's hands to take over completely. It's in this moment, quiet, unannounced, that the greatest spiritual shifts occur. God often waits until your striving is exhausted, until the noise inside your heart has settled, and only trust remains. That's when He moves. Every saint in Scripture had to face this silent crossing point. Abraham had to release Ishmael before he could embrace Isaac. Hannah had to surrender her desire for a son before God opened her womb. Even Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, fell to his knees and said, "Not my will, but yours be done." In that moment of complete surrender, heaven opened, and from what looked like defeat came resurrection that changed eternity. Your story follows the same divine rhythm. Surrender is not the end of hope, it's the beginning of divine motion. You may not realize it, but heaven always waits for your surrender before it releases your breakthrough, because surrender is the highest form of faith. It says, "God, even if you don't move how I expect, I still believe you're good." It's the faith that trusts God's character when his timing makes no sense. This kind of faith is dangerous, not because it's weak, but because it's indestructible. The enemy can't manipulate a heart that no longer needs control. Once you've learned to trust God in the dark, you become unstoppable in the light. There's a hidden truth here. Surrender is where heaven's choreography begins to accelerate. What took years to build in silence can shift in moments once surrender takes root. Because when your heart aligns with heaven, God no longer has to fight against your fear. He can move through your obedience. Don't think of Esther. She didn't choose her delay. She was chosen by it. For years, she lived in quiet preparation, unnoticed, uncertain, waiting for a purpose that had not yet revealed itself. But when the time came, when surrender outweighed fear, she stepped before the king. And in one act of obedience, history pivoted. Her years of waiting turned into the catalyst for a nation's deliverance. This is how God works. He uses what feels like delay to prepare you for moments that alter everything. The silence is not random. It's the sound of heaven rearranging destiny. Miriam, the woman whose prayers once echoed unanswered, began to sense this subtle shift. It wasn't loud or visible, but she noticed peace settling in places where anxiety used to rule. She no longer obsessed over outcomes. Her prayers changed from God. Make it happen to God. Make me ready. That's the secret few understand. The waiting season becomes holy when your desire shifts from wanting something from God to wanting God himself. And that's where miracles begin, in the soil of stillness, watered by surrender. One night, Miriam woke in the early hours before dawn. The world was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against her window. She felt prompted to pray, not for things, not for answers, but simply to listen. In that stillness, she sensed the presence of God so vividly it brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't a voice of instruction this time, but of assurance. What I am building, you will soon see. Stay still. The shift is closer than you think. She didn't know it then, but within days, the opportunity she thought had died years ago would suddenly reopen. Not through effort or manipulation, but through divine alignment. Someone who had once rejected her work reached out unexpectedly, this time offering not rejection, but partnership. When heaven moves, it doesn't need permission. And that's the mystery of surrender. Once you stop trying to force open doors, God opens the ones no man can shut. The shift happens after surrender, never before. If you're in that space right now, the quiet after exhaustion, know this: you are closer to breakthrough than you think. God's silence means He's in the details. The very delay that once tormented you is now the platform for divine demonstration. But you must trust the pause. You must believe that every withheld answer is still wrapped in His love. Faith is not believing that God will do it your way. It's believing that His way is better, even when it hurts. And here's something most never realize until the end of their waiting. The real miracle is not what you receive, but who you become in the process. The blessing may arrive in a moment, but the person it's meant for takes time to build. The delay, then, was never about denial. It was about becoming like clay in the potter's hands. You've been shaped, pressed, and refined, not to break you, but to perfect the vessel for what's coming. God doesn't waste waiting seasons. He sanctifies them. He builds endurance where impatience used to live. He replaces desperation with discernment. He deepens your roots so that when the storm passes, you're not just standing, you're flourishing. And soon, the stillness will break. The timing will align. The seed that's been hidden will finally emerge, not weak or fragile, but powerful, ready, unstoppable. Because when God moves after a season of surrender, He moves suddenly. Years of silence can collapse into seconds of favor. Closed doors open. Hearts soften. Paths straighten. Opportunities multiply. Everything begins to make sense in a single divine moment. But remember this, when it happens, it will not be because you earned it, but because you yielded to it. And that's the beauty of surrender. It invites heaven to finish what your strength could never start. Miriam would later say that her waiting wasn't a detour. It was destiny disguised. She learned that the stillness she once feared was the space where God was closest. She discovered that faith doesn't grow in answered prayers, but in the echo between them. And that's the truth for you too. When it feels like nothing is happening, remember, heaven is never still. Delay is not God's way of holding you back. It's His way of preparing the stage for something you wouldn't believe if He told you now. Your delay is divine choreography, and when the curtain finally rises, you'll see that every second of silence had purpose. Every story written by God ends with glory, not always the kind you expected, but the kind your soul was designed for. The delay that once felt endless begins to unravel with quiet perfection. Suddenly, the weight you carried starts to make sense. The prayers you thought were ignored echo back to you in the form of answered moments, not loud, not flashy, but woven into your days like a secret rhythm of grace. And as you look back, you realize every pause, every closed door, every moment of silence was leading here, to this unveiling, to this divine becoming. When God moves, it rarely begins with noise. It begins with stillness, like the breath before dawn. You don't always see it coming because heaven doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. What once felt delayed now feels divinely timed, and what you thought was wasted has suddenly become sacred. Because God never forgot. He was never late. He was building something eternal behind the curtain of your impatience. Miriam woke one morning with the same sunrise she'd seen every day for years, but something felt different. The light seemed softer, warmer, almost alive. She didn't know why, but she sensed that something invisible had shifted. Later that afternoon, her phone rang with news that would change everything. An opportunity far greater than anything she'd prayed for had opened. One that aligned perfectly with her purpose. One that only made sense now, after the delay. She fell to her knees, not in shock, but in awe, because this time she wasn't thanking God for the blessing. She was worshiping Him for the process. The waiting had become holy to her, every quiet day, every unanswered prayer, every moment she thought he had abandoned her. It was all part of the story. The silence had been the classroom where she learned the sound of his whisper. And in that sacred revelation, something clicked deep in her spirit. God had not changed his mind about her. He had been changing her mind about him. That's the mystery few ever grasp. That delays are not proof of God's distance, but invitations to deeper intimacy. He doesn't make you wait because he wants you to suffer. He makes you wait so that when he moves, you'll know it was high. You'll see it in the details. How the timing could not have been more perfect. How the pain you endured prepared you for the people you're now called to reach. How the loss you thought would destroy you became the soil for a harvest of wisdom and compassion you didn't know you possessed. And you'll see it, that God was never slow. He was strategic. Every delay is an act of divine engineering. Every waiting season is heaven, weaving the threads of your story into something you couldn't have scripted. What looks like pause to you is perfect pacing to him. Even now, as you listen to this, your waiting is not wasted. The silence is not empty. It's filled with divine preparation. Somewhere in the unseen, heaven is arranging what you've been praying for. Conversations you haven't heard yet. Doors you haven't walked through yet. Favor you haven't encountered yet. The wait feels endless because you cannot see the scale of what God is building. But when the moment comes, it will come suddenly. One divine encounter will redeem years of delay. One yes from heaven will make every no make sense. One move of God will align everything you thought was lost. But even then, the true miracle won't be the blessing you receive. It will be the peace you found in the process. You'll no longer crave speed because you'll have tasted purpose. You'll no longer chase answers because you'll have discovered presence. You'll walk differently, pray differently, see differently because you'll know. Waiting was never wasted. The delay was God's way of teaching you how to see him clearly. And as that revelation sinks in, the anxiety that once ruled you will lose its power. You'll no longer feel behind because you'll realize that in God's story, nothing is late. Not one prayer, not one tear, not one season. Even the pauses have purpose. If you could see what God is aligning right now, you wouldn't question the delay. You'd thank him for it. You'd see how he's been protecting you from premature exposure, from misplaced opportunities, from people who were not ready to walk where he's taking you. You'd see that every disappointment was divine redirection, not rejection. You'd see that while you thought he was silent, he was actually safeguarding. Because here's the truth. What God is preparing for you will require strength you wouldn't have had if he had moved sooner. He delayed so you could grow, so your faith could deepen, so your heart could learn to love him more than his answers. And that's why, when it finally happens, you'll handle it differently. You won't boast. You'll bow. You won't cling to the gift. You'll cling to the give. That's what happens when delay becomes destiny. You come out of it refined, not bitter, stronger, not skeptical. You'll stand in what you once only prayed for, and you'll realize the waiting wasn't punishment. It was preparation for glory. The proof that God was preparing something bigger isn't found in how fast it comes, but in how transformed you are when it arrives. Miriam's story is not just hers, it's yours, too. Every person who's walked through divine delay has felt that ache of wondering, did God forget me? And every one of them, at the right time, discovered the same truth. He was working when they couldn't see him. If you are still in the middle of your waiting, take this as your reminder. Heaven's silence does not mean heaven's stillness. The delay is not a detour, it's direction. And when the moment comes, you won't need to force it. You'll simply recognize it, because what's coming will fit perfectly. The delay will make sense. The wait will feel worth it. The promise will arrive, clothed in peace. And when you finally see it unfold, you'll whisper the same words every soul eventually learns. My delay was never denial. It was God preparing something far greater than I imagined. And heaven will smile, because you'll